Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you're doing well. So this image was really popular, has 83,000 likes, and I just wanted to analyze it because I see it as so much hypocrisy, especially coming from the Christians in the American right wing. Now, it was posted by a fake blonde, just bleached and flat-ironed her hair so much so that I bet her hair falls off like dry wheat. And she has a MAGA hat on. So I still don't believe anyone would be this tacky and cliche to write something so rude and uncouth on the back of their vehicle. But, you know, MAGA, they like to be bombastic, in your face, and raunchy, rude. They don't really have a lot of class, you know. At least there's some polished elements with, you know, some people in society, but MAGA seems to really like to be up in your grill. And they write, can't feed them, don't breed them, the government is not your baby's daddy. Now, we're called the United States, united. And then in the Pledge of Allegiance, one nation under God, indivisible. So indivisible, right? The Federal Union, okay? Now, the states all coming together and recognizing the federal whole and working towards common goals. And we don't want to have Thomas Hobbes' state of nature where life is nasty, brutish, and short. Because if we're going to have a dog-eat-dog society and factions rise up, that's going to cause a lot of problems. And when you tell poor people, you know, if you can afford to feed your children, you shouldn't have any. So what does that tell these poor women to do? Abortion. And isn't it the right wing who says abortion is wrong, abortion is murder, they argue? And then you're like, well, wait a minute. So you tell them women they shouldn't chase a career, which will help them be more financially secure if their man leaves them. And in this economy, we can see that there's inflation, over 1.7 million cars have been repossessed. And in 2023, there was over 1 million abortions. We have medical bankruptcy on the rise. Lots of people cannot afford rent on a minimum wage. So if you work a minimum wage and then you try to find a 2-bedroom apartment, in most cities you're not going to find it. You're going to have several jobs. And when you look at the prices of wages, like the rate of wages, they haven't kept up with inflation. And the Republicans are against raising the minimum wage. Okay, so Republicans are against universal free childcare, universal preschool, and then they are against universal free school lunches for kids. They're against universal health care, and now they're gloating about cutting EBT SNAP benefits. These same people then say family is wealth, and they also ignore how the military is made up of poor women's children. And I don't even know one millionaire or a multimillionaire whose wife has had 10 kids. It's usually poor people, and then the more educated you are, the less children you have. And when you tell a woman, get back in the kitchen, and then she doesn't have a retirement, savings, right, no 401k, her payout from Social Security is not going to be too high because she hasn't paid in, and she sacrifices her career and college education to raise children for the nation, and then you spit on her by saying, hey, how dare you think the government is your daddy? And before you say go to your local churches, so are we going to turn churches into grocery stores? Churches are places of worship. And how much pressure is that going to put on every single church to feed 40 million Americans every single month? That's quite a lot. Now, some would argue that they get 501c3 tax breaks, churches, right? Churches are exempt from taxation in that regard because they were urged to do some charity work. Now, we have to remember, not everyone has a vehicle, all right, especially now. And how are you supposed to get this food delivered to you? Now, I know in Utah there was Deseret Industries. They would have Mormons. They would drop off some food for you. And there was not any strings attached. But let's not pretend that some churches, they do want you to have to attend in order to feed you. Right? There's an awkwardness there. And you're turning your priest, the nuns, you're turning them into soup halls, soup kitchens. And sure, maybe you want to go that route. But food banks are already saying they're stretched pretty thin. And remember, further, how did the cartels and the mafias get popular back in the day? And still some of the cartels today, but they fed the poor. Okay? When you have parallel governments of the cartels and mobs growing because they use the drug money to feed the needy, this means that the people will not snitch on the cartels, the narcos, when they're trafficking their stuffs. Okay? Because they see them as sort of a Robin Hood figure, even though those people cause a lot of decay. The government is taking tax dollars and giving it to Argentina, is not real, Ukraine, and then telling the American people, no, you're not important. You're not important. Don't give you food. Whereas in the past, if you study when there's bread riots or what happens when an empire cannot feed its people, then you're like, what? And that was a time when people were more self-reliant. See, a lot of people, they don't know how to cook for themselves. They have a palate that's been corrupted by high fructose corn syrup. They are used to artificial flavors. And they're so exhausted from coming home from work and their minimum wage jobs that they don't want to really eat something healthy. When I look at an onion, I think of all kinds of ways to cook it, what I can include it in. Different onions provide different flavors to a dish, and how they taste raw versus how they taste caramelized. And I get excited. There are others, though, who can see a can of garbanzo beans and not really know what to do with it. So they get a lot of mismatched items in the food bank box, and they don't really know what to do. So they use EBT to kind of have a little treat every now and then. And unfortunately, a lot of Americans, even if they're not on EBT and SNAP benefits, they eat highly processed foods. And Americans have been given heavy amounts of regulation zoning laws where they're not allowed to have a chicken coop in their backyard. They cannot grow food in the front yard because the homeowners associations care more about aesthetics. And they're like, no, everybody has to have a trim, green lawn that you're literally pouring water on grass that is of no use at all. And then they pour pesticides on the grass to get rid of dandelions, which have a utility, which you can make tea from them. There's wonderful dandelion jelly recipes. It's a great herb. And I actually have tea at my home for that. And they're edible. The greens are also used for salads and a lot of Greek cooking. So for some reason, Americans think I got to spend all this money to spray my lawn with pesticides to get rid of dandelions. And if you have dandelions in your yard, you get judged, and then people nag and complain. And this pollutes the water. It's also dangerous. Pesticides cause cancer. That's a fact. So no matter which way you square it, you're noticing that we could have a lot of food if we taught people to go back to the old-fashioned ways of utilizing the space that they have been given to grow sustenance, have food, have fruit trees. Freeways could have walnuts and all kinds of anarchy plants. You know, sow up a pumpkin patch. California could definitely do that because of the weather. Date palm trees, plantain trees, you name it. You know, we could do that. We could feed people. But alas, more and more people are becoming selfish. So it's not surprising to see that people form their little communities. So the Magatardians complain that immigrants come over and form their own communities. Well, when an immigrant comes here and they see, well, there's no unity here Just look at American culture. Put the kid in the daycare, put granny in the old folks home. Dad's at work all day, mom's at work all day. And then the kids are at boarding school, summer camp, or they're at school 5 days a week from 8:30 to 3:30 or from 8:20 to 2:20. And depending on their age. This divides the family. And when they all come together at night, each individual person has an iPad. They're not really unified. And they're not trying to go outside and water plants and cultivate food after, a double shift. So people rely on others to feed them and they lose the respect for culinary arts. The schools don't really teach about farming, homesteading, canning, pickling, anything like that, really. Home ec is becoming a rare thing. And so we could help people to have more self-reliance. We don't really talk about marriage in schools or how to keep a marriage together. But the Bible doesn't say poor people shouldn't have kids. It says be fruitful and multiply. And the fact of the matter is, if the government didn't tax people and then use that money for SNAP, a lot more people would starve because people are not as charitable as we think. Start asking these influencers, have you donated to your local food bank? Oh, sure I did. Okay, how much are you donating so that others can eat? And you'll see that they'll be like, oh, I haven't donated anything. Okay then. So the people who are complaining about their tax dollars going towards feeding other citizens and people, they themselves do not donate to food charities at all. And they think, oh, well, one time I gave a homeless guy a bag of McDonald's fries. Yeah, that's not really feeding things. And you have a choice. You feed the masses or crime goes up. Okay? That's really the way it is. And you really should look at it as an issue of national security. When you've made the population not able to grow their own food, and you haven't taught them how, and they work so much they don't have the time to, and then their wages are so low, well, then you're going to have a bit of an anarchy problem going on here. So the Christians spreading such memes is really reprehensible and just shows you that they haven't paid attention to over the 50 verses in the Bible that talk about feeding the needy, sheltering the needy, being kind to the alien resident, the sojourner, the traveler, the guest, to be hospitable, right? But they're like, oh, Thessalonians, oh, he who does not work shall not eat. There's obviously going to be sloths. But when you look at the overwhelming amount of people who need it, sure, the occasional slob might get a bowl of soup. But you got to still help people. Are we the United States? Are we indivisible? Because if we're going dog-eat-dog and we're forming guerrilla factions, then, or guerrilla, I should pronounce it like that, then, well, you're not going to really like that world, are you? Because then things will really change. And then the eyeing your neighbor with the evil eye will definitely become more intense. And jealousy and it will go more rampant. Because you got a fat turkey on your table when someone has frozen dinner. And then resentment builds. We don't really foster a lot of brotherhood, sisterhood in America. How can we brag about being the greatest country on earth when people are like, no, the government will feed them. Like, there's a government program. And then the same people who are calling to cut these programs are fine with things going towards warmongering. And you say, oh, sure, well, I hate that too. It's like, a large percentage of the budget in America goes towards war. Let some of it goes toward food. And fight for food security, okay? There's a lot of food waste in America. We can fix it. Just help people learn to garden, to hunt, to fish, all that. It takes time, but we can do it. But women who are poor deserve to have children. And if you can, donate to your local food bank. And ignore people like this who shame the poor and then call themselves Christian. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. Ameen.